This is the story of Nibi, the wise Christmas mouse. Welcome to Sober Living Snippets, where we live alcohol-free so we can heal our relationships, feel youthful again, and ditch regret and shame. Gals, it is Christmas Day, and I send to you all the love of my heart. This is the story of Nibi, the wise Christmas mouse. Nibi was the matriarch of a large and very happy family of mice. Generation after generation had lived with Nibi and thrived with Nibi in the attic of an old farmhouse. How had they lived so long and so happily, considering that most house mice were very short-lived because of big fat cats that roamed the house? Well, Nibi was a wise mouse, and she knew that as long as the family stayed in the attic and the cellar and never ventured into the rooms of the house proper, all would be well. How had Nibi learned this secret? So many mice families in the neighborhood had gone the way of the cat, but not Nibi. Here's how Nibi discovered the secret to survival. In her youth, Nibi was not so wise. Nibi had been born in the attic and told that the key to thriving and the key to health and happiness in a long life was to stay either in the attic or the route from the attic to the cellar through the walls. You see, the mice had created this beautiful route. It was safe. The cat couldn't get anywhere near it. They simply traveled from the attic through the walls down to the cellar. And in the cellar, that is where the human family kept all sorts of stored foods. They kept their grains, and they kept their seeds, and they kept their vegetables from the garden. And although many of these foods were in secure bins, there's always enough spillage for the mice to come down, pick up the crumbs, and take them up to the attic and thrive and survive and multiply and live their happy lives. However, despite knowing the rules and the way to survival, Nibi had an experience that changed her forever. And this experience would either kill Nibi or teach her how to live a long and happy life. Luckily for us, she learned the lesson. Here is what happened. At about 3 months old, Nibi was going about her regular day when suddenly she smelt a smell. This smell was unlike anything she had ever smelled before. It instantly transported her to heaven. She was so enamored of this smell, she started running around the attic, sniffing and sniffing and sniffing, and finally she ran over to her auntie and said, "Aunt Pippy, what's that smell?" And Pippy said, "Oh, Nibi, that's a smell that comes up every now and then, but we have to ignore it." "What is it, Auntie? What is it?" And Auntie Pippy said, "That is the woman of the house baking sticky buns. That means it must be Christmas, for it is only at Christmas time that she bakes those sticky buns. She puts in them honey and raisins and dates, and she covers them with butter and honey, and they're sticky and they're gooey, and the bread is so soft, and the smell wafts throughout the house. But Nibi, we will never taste those buns because they are never in the cellar, and we never go into the rooms of the house because that, Nibi, is where the cat lives. And we know that is way too dangerous. So Nibi, you will never ever taste a sticky bun." Nibi listened as her mouth drooled and her nose twitched as the smell wafted up from the kitchen, but she realized that her Aunt Pippy was right, and she went about her day. The next day, the smells began again, and Nibi just about went wild with desire for the sticky buns. She peeped through the hole in the attic down into the human rooms, and she saw that the woman of the family had placed the sticky buns on platters all over the house, it seemed. There was one on the kitchen table, one on the table in the sitting room. There they were, wide open. There were no lids on these platters. They were just open, available to anyone. Nibi watched as she peered down into the sitting room and stared at those sticky buns. She could see the honey dripping off them and the cinnamon, the dates, the bread. The smell made her nose twitch and her whiskers vibrate. Nibi knew she had to try a sticky bun. She made her plan. As the family went about its day, eating the food from the cellar that was very healthy but oh so boring. Seeds and nuts and grains that had fallen from the bags were their fare. Very healthy, but incredibly boring. Nibi sat there and realized she had to go down. That night, when everyone was asleep, Nibi waited and waited till she could hear the snoring from her parents and her auntie and her grandparents and her cousins. And when she was sure everyone was asleep, she tiptoed across the room, went into the wall, down to the sitting room, and made her way out a tiny hole in the wall. She found herself underneath the couch, and she knew that the sticky buns were on the table in front of the couch. She also knew that the big fat orange cat lived in this room and slept in this room. So she carefully peered out from under the couch, and sure enough, there was the cat sleeping in the corner. He was snoring, and his whiskers were twitching, so she knew that he was asleep. Carefully, she tiptoed out from under the couch, up the leg of the table, onto the table, over to the platter, and dove into the sticky buns. She could taste the honey on her tongue, and her whiskers got stuck together. She rolled around in the sticky buns, getting it all over her fur, eating as much as she possibly could, realizing she couldn't eat enough. Tearing pieces off, she stuck a few hunks on her back with the honey and found herself covered in sticky bun. From whisker to tail, she was covered in honey with balls of dough stuck to her back so she could carry it up to the attic and have it tomorrow. When she had all she could possibly eat and had stored the pieces of sticky bun securely on her back with the honey, she left the platter and started tippy-toeing across the table, down the leg of the table, under the couch, and into the hole, and up the wall she ran. She raced across the attic to a secret hiding spot and laid there panting and panting, drunk with a belly full of sticky bun. She was stuck with honey, and she spent the rest of the night cleaning herself. She licked her whiskers and her tail, fur and her paws and her legs, and licked and licked and licked. And she pulled the sticky buns that were stuck on her back off and hid them under a pile of insulation in the corner, and licked until she was soaking wet but clean. Then she went and crawled up in a ball and went to sleep with the rest of the family. The next day, Nibi had a headache. She had a tummy ache. She felt so sick. She realized she had eaten too many sticky buns, but she also knew that she loved those sticky buns. And sure enough, later that afternoon, the woman of the house started baking again, and there came that smell up to the attic. The cinnamon, the honey, the dates, the sticky buns were being baked again, and Nibi knew she was in deep trouble. She could feel her mouth drooling. She was obsessed with those sticky buns, and she knew she would not be able to resist. When her store of sticky buns under the insulation ran out 2 days later, Nibi went back down to get some more. Through the wall she went when everyone was asleep. Under the couch, up the leg of the table she went, over to the platter and dove into the sticky buns, rolling around in honey, nibbling on dates. She could feel the cinnamon gritty in her eyes as the honey stuck her whiskers together and her toes. She was in her glory, laying on her back in the sticky bun bowl, rolling around, chewing and licking and glorying with her eyes closed, drunk with sticky buns, in heaven as the smell of the cinnamon and the taste of the honey took her away from all her cares. And then she suddenly realized, what am I doing? She opened her eyes and looked over, and the orange cat was staring at her. Nibi knew her time had come. Her heart racing, she jumped out of the sticky buns, raced across the table, under the couch, over to the wall, and she felt the cat's paw grab her tail and pull her back. The cat was pulling her out from under the couch. She could feel its claws pulling at the base of her tail, and she knew that this was the end of it. Somehow, she dug her claws into the carpet and pulled with all her might and broke free and sprung to the hole in the wall. Into the wall she went, up the wall, up to the attic, and lay panting and puking and panting and puking and crying. She lay there in a pile of insulation sticking to her as the honey dripped off her eyelashes and her whiskers. Her toes were stuck together. The base of her tail was bleeding. Nibi was humiliated as she vomited, and the vomit mixed with the honey, and she lay there in her own self-disgust, panting, her heart racing. How could I risk my life for a sticky bun? Hours went by, and Nibi listened to her family snoring in the corner. She mustered up the energy to lick her body clean, licking off every speck of cinnamon, every drop of honey. She cleaned up the vomit, sweeping it under some insulation. She cleaned her whiskers and her eyelashes. She licked her tail. She cleaned her wounds. And then she made her way to bed. The next day, she was very nervous that someone would notice the wounds on her tail. But nobody seemed to notice. She went about her business, feeling such deep shame and loneliness. She couldn't tell her family what she had done, that she had weakened and gone into the family rooms. She didn't know how she was ever going to survive the smell of the sticky buns that she knew was coming again. How would she resist the smell of the sticky buns? And her loneliness grew as the days went by, as her tail healed, and the woman of the house started baking again, and the smell came up, and Nibi knew, oh my God, I must have more sticky bun, and it will kill me. She was so torn between the desire for sticky buns and the desire for self-respect and survival that she cried, and suddenly her Aunt Pippy saw her and came over and said, Nibi, I know what happened to you the other night. Nobody else knows, Nibi, but I know what happened, and I know how you feel. Pippy talked to Nibi for hours that afternoon and told her own story of the sticky buns, how she too had been lured down to the human rooms, how she too had rolled in the honey and humiliated herself in the sticky buns, how she too could not resist those sticky buns. She told Nibi that with her help, Nibi would be able to live her life in happiness and joy without the sticky buns, regardless of the smells that would waft up to the attic. Nibi would overcome her desire for those sticky buns as long as she stuck close to Pippy. Pippy explained that when the desire for sticky buns overcame her, she must come to Pippy and share the feelings. Together, they would overcome the desire. Together, they would help Nibi grow into a mouse strong enough and mature enough to resist the lure of the sticky buns, because nothing would stop that woman from baking them. They were there. They were a part of the mouse's life. They weren't going away. And so the only choice was for her to grow mature and strong, who knew her strength and realized that she wanted to live more than she wanted to eat those sticky buns. And she grew wiser and wiser. Soon, the sticky buns meant nothing to her. And she was able to live her life in happiness, eating the healthy food that was available to them in the cellar. And on her life went. When her Aunt Pippy passed away, she knew that she was safe, even without Pippy's help, because she had learned and grown into the matriarch. And she knew that if ever another member of her family fell victim to the sticky buns, she would be there and able to carry on the legacy that Pippy had started. She would be able to help anyone else that was lured by those sticky buns. Nibi had learned a lot, and now she was a matriarch. She was on her 18th month, and everyone knows that house mice only live 6 to 12 months. Nibi was very wise, and she had grown that way through adversity and overcoming, and with the help of a wise Auntie Pippy. Merry Christmas, gals. Thanks for popping in. Be sure to come back tomorrow so we can keep your head on straight. Sending you buckets of love.